Hello, everybody. It's Steve Olson, Wormwood System Observer, and tonight we have a special guest that I'm very proud to have, David Mead, author of the new book, Planet 7X, Return 2017 Return. David, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Steve.
So David, I'm really excited about your book, and I'm excited about some of the findings that you've had. I got a chance to read the book, and it's excellent, and I recommend it to all my subscribers. However, I know the first question out of my audience is going to be, hey, we've heard a lot of people set dates around this Nibiru wing planet thing. What makes David's book or David's information any different?
Excellent question. Well, we know Planet X is real. There's so much science behind it. There's so much typical government cover-up behind it that we can go over, and a lot of it's bush league by the intelligence agencies, of course. But we know it's real, and we know it exists, and we know it's inbound. We know from human intelligence. We know from signal intelligence. We know from CIA insiders. We know by observation. We know it exists. And above all, we know it exists because who was the apocalypse written by? The book of Revelation. It comes from the highest authority, Jesus Christ himself. So to the apostle John on the Isle of Patmos almost 2,000 years ago, and he said in there twice, there's two different asteroids headed here, and one of them is called Wormwood. And so we know it exists, we know it's inbound. Now, as to the more particular question of exactly when it's going to arrive, I have been researching, I've been looking at this topic for about 5 years, and I didn't come to any definite conclusions on that until the last few months when I published the book, Planet X, The Arrival in 2017 by David Mead, available on Amazon. When I published that book, I wrote it around the premise that if we research highly enough the apocalypse, the book of Revelation, we can discover that it is not only in there, not just symbolically, but really, actually, as an object that's approaching our atmosphere, but we can discover a date. And I did a lot of research, and there's 3 or 4 or 5 chapters in there that lead to a discussion. It's a very complex matrix, but I reached the conclusion it would approach us and be within reasonable Earth orbit, 10, 15 million miles away, by the end, no later than the end of 2017. In fact, I came up with a very precise month, a very precise week, and of course the year 2017. And I got it from a cryptographic analysis of appropriate chapters of the book of Revelation, where it's listed very clearly and explicitly, although I must say it's hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, I find that in the last couple of months, David, I've been having the same thing with the evolution of the channel that we've created with Wormwood System Observer, that it seems like chapters and verses in Revelation, any eschatology, has just changed almost magically in front of my eyes.
Well, right, it's like it's coming alive. Well, like the prophet Daniel said back in the Old Testament, he said these things are sealed up, or what he heard these things are sealed up until the end. Well, I'll tell you what, we are definitely there. We're in the final months and years of the end right now. Not the end of the world. The world's going to go on for a long time. But we are coming head on into the what the Bible calls in the book of Revelation, the Great Tribulation, the last 3.5 years, which is the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments and the seal judgments and so forth in the book of Revelation. Some people call it the apocalypse, and we're coming head on into that. And one of the instruments that's going to be used to impact the earth and create a lot of that disaster that we read about in that book is Planet X or Nibiru.
Yeah, and I've come to the conclusion based on the studies I've done, and I won't go through chapter and verse. We'll have future guests that actually have broken down the judgments and details, which I look forward to having on later. But I can tell you that this event is, I believe, the precursor to the tribulation and the precursor to the Antichrist. I'm just going to say it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's highly possible that right before this event occurs, moments, minutes, days, that the rapture could happen. But I do believe it's going to cause some earth change effects that we may have to put up with for even a month or so before anything gets us out of here, if you know what I'm saying. So I think you need to be prepared. All listeners need to be prepared spiritually. We need to have a clear conscience and a good relationship with God. But we also need to have some level of education, knowledge, and physical preparation. You might call it survival preparation for some of the pre-Planet X events that are about to happen.
Yes, and I think that there's some good materials out there that I would point people to. People like John Moore is a great resource for that, and some others that we can talk about later. You know, one thing though that was completely unique about your approach and your information was this Nebra sky disk, and it's basically been hidden from the public until I think 1999. Is that correct?
Right. That's about when it was discovered by a couple of treasure hunters in Germany. Let me give you a quick briefing on that for the benefit of your listeners. The Nebra sky disk is a 12-inch bronze disk, and it may be the key in determining the last recorded time in history that Planet X flew by the Earth. The disk itself is bronze, inlaid with gold, and the sky disk of Nebra was found near Europe's oldest observatory in Gossach, Germany. Now, the story of the disk is an unconventional discovery. It was found in 1999 by German treasure hunters who used metallic detectors inside an ancient forest. However, German law dictated that all such relics are state property, so instead of turning it in, they attempted to sell it on the international market 3 years later. But working for the Swiss government, an archaeologist named Harold Miller posed as a straw buyer, backed by the police, backed by Interpol. The disc was then seized by authorities. So in any case, it contains symbols. It includes the sun, the moon, the constellations, Pleiades, Capricorn, Piraeus, and Gemini. Now, the disc reflects the sun and the position of a solar eclipse. What is causing the eclipse? Well, it's not the moon, which is on the opposite side of where it should be located. So the best deductive logic is that an unknown near-Earth object is causing the eclipse. Let's go further. The 32-centimeter disc weighs about 2 kilograms, decorated, as I say, with gold leaf symbols, reflects 4 planets, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Mercury. Now, using modern-day astronomical software, we can actually plot the day and hour the disc was produced. And that result is April 6, 1810 BC at 8:30 a.m. The disc was thus created during the Bronze Age, exactly 3,826 years ago. There's a curved bar at the bottom of the riverbank, the Saal River, which currently exists, and much of the disc's current coloration is green due to a tarnishing effect. The discovery site is a prehistoric enclosure in the Ziegelroda Forest, known by the name of Mittelberg or Central Hill. It's about 60 kilometers west of Leipzig. Now, the treasure hunters stated that they found it within a pit in the forest near the ancient Gossach Observatory. A very interesting point discovered when archaeologists examined the disk, reflects the constellation Orion at the very bottom. Orion should not have been observable from that location in Germany at that time. The nearest location from which it could have been possibly observed is Luxor, Egypt, which further adds to the mystery. Now, the only logical conclusion is that the 26 to 30 degree difference is accounted for by a simultaneous pole shift, which occurred when this disk was produced. Now, the mystery-shrouded sky disk of Nebra is thus, in my opinion, an advanced astronomical clock. It's a compendium of knowledge from the earliest times. It gives us the best proof of the existence and passage of Planet X in the ancient world. The purpose of the sky disk is no longer a matter of speculation. It is the oldest visual representation of the sky in existence, and it postulates the approach of a near-Earth object causing the daytime eclipse, as well as causing a major pole shift that has just occurred 3,826 years ago.
Wow. And for all my listeners, I want to let you know, this artifact has not been in the general public view because it was seconded by criminals and it was hidden from all of us. And this is what makes David, this is what makes your calculations on the arrival of Planet X so interesting. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, how you calculated it?
In terms of, okay, going forward a little bit into the book, into the main premise of the book, let's go over that. So it involves a number of subtopics. I'll get into two or three of them in this part of the discussion. Now, as you know, and as most people who study eschatology know, they're very familiar with Revelation chapter 12, and that's the woman in Virgo. And of course, we all know the woman Virgo makes her celestial appearance on September 23rd, 2017. The woman is the constellation Virgo, or Virgin. She represents the nation of Israel. She's described in the book of Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Here's what it says. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. That's Revelation 12, 1 and 2. Now, this lasts for several hours in the sky at that point. According to computer-generated astronomical models, this sign has never before occurred in human history. It will occur once on September 23rd, 2017. It will never occur again. It places us just before the sixth seal of Revelation. Now, that's not the final date in my book, but it is a very important, it's the key to the cryptogram. Every cryptogram, whether it was Enigma, which the Germans used to code 150 times 150 million combinations, their cryptography, their code in World War II that they used to encrypt and send messages. This is the key to it right here. Now, once we know that, we just have to keep following Revelation chapter 12. Again, I believe the book of the Apocalypse is a cryptogram set by the Almighty, and guess what? It is readable, it is understandable at this point. So, if you look further in Revelation, let's look at chapter 6, verse 12 very quickly, because I mentioned the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned to blood. That's Revelation 6:12. Now, October 5th, 2017, right after the sign of the woman, is the only full moon that occurs after September 23rd, 2017, but before October 11th. That's the end of the woman's pregnancy. That's when Jupiter exits. Jupiter's been there about, at that point, 42 weeks, and Jupiter completely exits the picture at that point. So, the key to seeing the red dragon, the Planet X, which is in Revelation 12, is to follow the sequence of its appearance after the Revelation 12 sign. Now let's look at these key points. One, the red dragon, Planet X Nibiru, is visible. This can only happen during a full disk solar eclipse. Otherwise, obviously, the blue daytime sky would hide the red dragon and all of the stars in the heavens, except the sun. Point two, as seen from the earth, the red dragon is enormous. The passage says its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky. So that's probably not literal because the stars are light years away. But I think what it means is that it's very close to the earth. And from the perspective of an observer on the surface of the earth, it would be blocking a view of a third of the stars. Now, point three, the red dragon is, quote, standing in front of the woman. This means the red dragon has not yet crossed the Earth's orbit. It is still between the Earth and the constellation Virgo. Point four, the woman was about to give birth. That means that the woman is still, quote, pregnant. Therefore, it is before October 11th, 2017. So if you're on Earth at that point, the red dragon's Planet X approach to the Earth will be hidden by the blue daytime sky until it's very close. And when it eclipses the sun, it is within hours of that time that, excuse me, it's within hours of that time that it approaches its perihelion with the sun and with the earth. So in the analysis, the only choice left for the full moon of Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, is the full moon of October 5th, 2017. Therefore, this is strong evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, in my opinion, in the Bible that links October 5th, 2017 with the appearance of Planet X.
Wow, that's unbelievable, and deductive logic. What I appreciate is the deductive logic that you use in that, David.
Well, very good. Yeah, I'm basically assuming that if it's not obviously symbolic in the Book of Revelation, that it is real.
Right. Hey, now my audience is obviously interested in Wormwood and from the perspective of Revelation, obviously. But what is the difference between Wormwood and Nibiru?
Well, I believe they're one and the same. I think they're different names. There was that fellow back in the 70s, Sitchin, who wrote the book about, he decoded some Sumerian texts, and they apparently, Sumeria was, I think, ancient Iran and, ancient Persia, and he decoded that and said, well, these people recorded this passage in that part of the world as well, and they called it Nibiru, which means planet of the crossing. And then if you look into the last century, if you look at the finding of Uranus and Pluto and the moon of Pluto, and look into everything that's really happened, the first time I think it picked up the nomenclature Planet X was the last century, the last 100 years, and Percival Lowell looked for it, and others have looked for it. NASA started looking for it in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Probably Pioneer was a mission where they were looking for it, and Pioneer went in two directions, and in one direction there was a problem. It was knocked off course, probably because it came within some distance of Planet X as it approached the outer part of the solar system. So Pioneer, they were looking for it. They started looking for it seriously in the late 70s, and that's when an individual at the U.S. Naval Observatory who was working for Dr. Harrington found that Pluto had a moon, and guess what? That moon was not sufficient in size. It was very tiny, and Pluto's very small. Later, of course, it's been qualified as only a dwarf planet, but it's no longer considered one of the planets. But that did not cause, they found out, because it's so small, that could not have caused the perturbations in the orbits of the outer planets. So they realized at that point they had to look for something. And shortly after that, in 1983, they developed, it was a joint venture of the US, UK, and I believe Norway, what's called the IRAS, the infrared satellite. They sent that on Earth orbit. It's supercooled helium. It went on a Earth orbit, and it scanned the skies, I believe, twice. And then they said after a few months, well, it's got to be shut down. We've got a problem with the supercooled helium, and we've only done a couple of sky scans, and we have found some anomalous objects. And by the way, we found something, and that's when, again, if you read the newspapers back in the late 80s, the New York Times and the Washington Post, astronomers actually called it Planet X at that point, and they coined it. But all of a sudden, first part of 1984, a blackout. So apparently, between 1983 and 1984, a couple of government guys, probably NSA types, got together, and they simply said, by the way, anything associated with this object, we're now stamping compartmentalized above top secret on it. Now, if you did that in private industry, that's called a conspiracy, two people deciding to cover something up. You do it with the government, it's called national security. Whatever it was you wish to call it, from that point on, there was a total blackout. Not so necessarily in Russia, because Russia is very open about this object, but in the United States, strangely, very, very cryptic. After that point, nothing but then all sorts of activity. Let's do the Hubble telescope. Let's do the South Pole telescope. After the year 2000, and so forth. And no real reason for all this rush and all this money, unless they needed those devices to really scan it and see it with amazing detail, because it is approaching apparently from the south of the ecliptic, and it can best be seen from the southern hemisphere, and particularly from the South Pole Observatory. So anyway, that nomenclature Planet X developed in the last 50 years, and before that it was called, by many people researching it, simply called Nibiru, and it has other names, Nemesis, the Destroyer, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, you talked a little bit about the cover-up that started in the early '80s, and one of the things we notice out in the kind of we'll call it the alternative media, for lack of a better word, where
Sure.
people are trying to say something, and they're using things like YouTube and other social media platforms to do it. And some of us are getting audiences, right? And as soon as I started to get to some information from satellites, Core 1, Core 2, other things that we were looking at, I found that I came under immense resistance. I couldn't upload videos. I was taken off the internet. I was, all kinds of tactics. How big is this cover up, and why are they covering it up?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to the money that's missing. So, guess what? I think it was the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld, then Secretary of Defense, he made an announcement at a press conference and said, "Oh, I've just found out, I've been informed that 2.2 trillion, not billion, but trillion, is missing from the Pentagon's budget. I don't know where it went." And after 9/11, we never heard any more about that, but the money was still missing. Well, according to Phil Schneider and others, and of course Phil Schneider was at Groom Lake Area 51, and he's was somewhat of an insider until his demise.
Until they murdered him.
That could well be it, because I think he had 13 attempts on his life that year, and I guess the last one did it. So
Yeah.
anyway, he said, well, they spend between 0.3 trillion and 1.5 trillion a year on these, and they have every year since the 1980s, and therefore we have anywhere from 150 of these on up in most of the states, not all the states. Most of the time they're located away from geologic faults, but not all the time. Now, and I don't really think it's going to make any difference. When Planet X passes, you're going to get, Richter scale of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 off the scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to collapse a lot of those structures,
Mm-hmm.
and tsunamis will do the rest in. So I don't think they're really safe havens. And if we just needed it for nuclear protection, well, they had the one in West Virginia where they can still reactivate it on 2 weeks' notice, and that would contain all of Congress right there, and you only need a couple dozen maybe for nuclear protection. Why do you need hundreds of these? Doesn't make sense.
And so the big question there, David, is, do you have any insights as to why they're keeping it secret from us?
Well, I think it's probably economic. A lot of people think there is a cartel, a private cartel of maybe 300 individuals or so, and I won't name who they are, but we're talking the trilateral types and the Bilderberg types and so on and so forth, that control the Federal Reserve and control the money supply to the government. And these people want to keep the cash registers ringing. It's probably basic economics, because they know that if this were made public, we're not like Russia. Russia's a lot of Russia's inland. They've got tens of thousands of these shelters. They've got cities built in that'll hold 200,000 people on the side of a mountain, not just military and government types, but civilians. Russia is so well protected. But the United States, they've just built these for the elite, and the money is missing. It's black ops money. And then on top of that, they're concerned that about 5 to 10% of the population lives on coastlines, which will be affected, and there would be mass panic.
Yeah, I understand the mass panic part of it, but it's still infuriating to me in many levels, because I believe that most Americans can handle the truth if it was presented with, reason and logic, and here's what we're going to do to prepare. I think that would have worked in 1995.
Right. If you look at it from a purely logical standpoint, if we were all cool customers, let's put it that way, if we were all cool customers, but these people that are in control are not necessarily cool customers. I believe they're subject to high levels of emotion. They obviously have hidden trillions of dollars of money in order to build these shelters just for themselves. So they're running scared, and they don't know what we know.
Yeah.
We know we're going to be protected.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about that. I have a lot of subscribers that will come on and be very concerned and, and be worried, fearful. What would you say to somebody that was fearful about this event coming, David?
Well, I would say that, you're going to have some events that occur right before it approaches Earth, Moon, Sun areas. And you're going to have some events that occur. I think one of these events that can be prepared for and that will probably happen before there's any really mass impact damage from it, you've got to realize that Planet X has high mass, a high level of magnetism. Now, it disrupts the surface of any planet it passes, and the electromagnetic influence changes the core of the Earth. Now, this triggers weather changes, seismic activity, volcanic eruptions. That's the reason we've had unexplained sinkholes, bizarre weather. So-called global warming is just a cover story. The Earth is heating up from the core outward because of the approach of Planet X. You know, many years ago, 50 years ago, there were 35 volcanic eruptions in a year. Now there's more than 35 of these in a single day. So we have to look at the mechanics of this. Planet X is a brown dwarf star. It's on an elliptical orbit probably every 3,600 to 800 years around the sun. And one thing it's going to do as it approaches, one of the first effects it's going to have is an electromagnetic effect. So we need to study that, and you can do some preparation for this. Now, the government could have done some preparation for this, but for some odd reason, and I think it just could be a case of ignorance, but they've done absolutely nothing. They have not hardened the civilian electrical grid. So, but they've done it to a limited extent on military installations. But what happens is, when this EMP effect occurs, this electromagnetic pulse effect, you can compare it to a solar flare. Let's look at solar flares. The biggest flares are X-class. Now, we've had a lot of X-class flares, and some go beyond the top of the scale, go beyond a 20. You have lower class flares, M flares, C flares, but the X-class flares are the biggest we've seen to date. Now, Y-class exists, but they're off the chart. So, what's going to happen? Well, you probably know about the hole in the ozone. Do you know about the hole in the magnetosphere? Jesse Ventura did a video on this. The area around the Earth that extends beyond the atmosphere is called the magnetosphere. It begins at about 1,000 kilometers and goes up. Now, the sun and the Earth's magnetic field create this layer. So NASA discovered through the Themis mission that the Earth's magnetic field contains a hole, which is 10 times larger than they previously believed. The magnetosphere has the purpose of sheltering us from solar flares, but now the hole is 4 times the size of the Earth. So National Geographic even reported that scientists said, well, an unexpected thick layer of solar particles inside the Earth's magnetic field suggests there are huge breaches in our planet's solar defenses. So if you have a tremendous solar storm, your risk assessment would be this. You'd have a coronal mass ejection that accompanies a Y-class solar flare. And this Y-class solar flare would probably send the part of the Earth exposed to it, maybe the whole Earth, back to the 1850s. It would have an EMP effect on circuitry and electronics. Only hardened military electronics would survive. So let's go back to the concept for a second of an EMP or electromagnetic pulse. You can get it 2 ways. You can get it from how I just described, from a solar flare, a major solar flare, or you can get it from the detonation of a nuclear device. So, in other words, if a rogue nation such as North Korea had a container ship and had an EMP device that they were provided by China or someone, and I think China and Russia are extremely dangerous, and I think they are I think North Korea's a proxy of them, but suppose they had one or are about to develop one, they could, move that container ship off the coast, and they could simply fire it over Kansas, a couple 100 miles, and you'd probably down most of the United States, part of Canada, and part of Mexico's electrical grid. Then they'd use a drone submarine to sink the ship. There'd be no evidence who it came from. But despite how it may or may not happen, that's the second way to create an electromagnetic pulse. But the net effect either way is the same. So, in fact, in the late summer of 1859, that's the last time a great solar storm hit the planet. It's called the Carrington event. And it, destroyed all the telegraph lines. Well, they were farming or agrarian back then, didn't affect them much. But nowadays, guess what would happen? You would lose food, you would lose the ability to transport, you would probably lose the functioning of a lot of cars and trucks, 50% or more simply wouldn't start. You would lose electronics, you would lose circuitry, you would lose communications, satellite communications would go down, ATMs wouldn't work at the bank, and the 2-day food supply on the Walmart shelf would be gone in a day. So that's what would happen.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think would happen. So I'm going to just suggest to my subscribers that go look up Faraday cage,
Right.
and the and the reason I'm saying that is because a Faraday cage is a place where you can protect some key electronics. And I would say one prepper tip today would be find yourself or make yourself a Faraday cage, and then put a ham radio receiver in there and other electronics, batteries, things like that that you would use in the aftermath of such an event, and those should be okay if they're inside the Faraday cage. So just a little prepper tip.
Excellent idea. Yeah, that, and uh, once that date and that month approaches, you need an emergency supply of food and water as well, at least a 21 to 30 day supply. So those are excellent preparation ideas.
Yeah, and I would say, you need to think about what your escape plan is going to be from the coasts. Just have a bug out plan. I think we're going to see some signs that are going to be pretty convincing just prior to the event, like David says. And I think there will be some time to react, but it won't be enough time for you to go start shopping at Walmart and finding your tents and your sleeping bags and all the things you need. You need to do that now. You need to go to the store now and buy at least a tent, sleeping bags for your family, enough water and food for 3 weeks minimum, and the ability to bug out of your home and get to a safe place inland. And those places can be found on many maps on the internet. And also, Dave's got a map in his book as well, too.
Yeah, I have the U.S. Navy map, which most of us are familiar with. Just in case you're not, it Mr. Moore, J.R. Moore, has interviewed a lot of Navy veterans, submarine veterans, and so forth that have moved to the Ozarks, which is a very safe area, by the way.
Yeah.
And they've indicated that they weren't told the what or the details. Well, you're learning that now. You're learning a lot more background information
Right.
than you'll ever get from a government debriefing. But these are people that maybe had continuity of government, clearances or whatever. And they basically were told, you might want to retire in the Ozarks or some high ground because here's what the Navy map of future America looks like, and it shows the West Coast or a good part of California underwater. It shows Florida and the East Coast submerged to 50 to 100 miles, and it shows down the midsection of the country from the Great Lakes south that the Mississippi River is no longer the Mississippi River, but it's just a large body of water. So, but there are very safe places. There are very, very safe places to live. I mean, there's Arizona, there's Colorado. The very dangerous places when you get into that time of the approach of Planet X, later next year, the very dangerous places, the places where you need that strategic relocation plan, would be if you happen to live in Florida or California. Those are two very dangerous states. California is highly dangerous. And
well, we knew that before Planet X, right, David? I mean, everybody knew that that's the site of the San Andreas Fault. Now we're learning about the subduction zones and all that. So I don't think the public will be surprised when California shakes, but when this rest of this stuff happens, they will be.
Exactly. So I think we could just use common sense there. And there are books written, out there on strategic relocation. It's just a matter of common sense and good judgment. Now, most of these books are very exotic, and they say, well, you could consider South America, you can consider Australia, you consider most of these places only if you have a couple $1 million. But there are safe places within the United States.
Yeah, and again, there's lots of materials out there. And then the second thing I would say, David, and I don't mean to usurp you because you've done a great. By the way, thank you for your interview tonight. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
You've been a wonderful guest, and we'd like to have you on in the future again if that's possible.
Absolutely.
But my final word would be to you is run, don't walk to Jesus Christ. Don't walk, don't slither, don't lollygag. Run to Jesus. Just grab him as tight as you possibly can and don't let go. That's my final message for tonight, David.
Well, that's right. I agree completely. You got to be spirit filled and led on a moment's notice in order to keep up with what's happening and to react and to be ready at all times. I totally agree.
Right. Well, thanks very much for your time, David, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you. Have a good evening.